When ego takes over, things fall apart. One podcast asked, could a sorry have changed anything? This is Super Sorry.
Welcome to Super Sorry, where we break down superhero stories through the lens of accountability, communication, and one big question. What could have been solved with an honest apology?
We're Todd and Amber, creative co-pilots, Marvel fans, and very invested in the idea that even superpowered people could benefit from just talking it out.
This show is for Marvel fans, superhero fans, and also for anyone who loves a good teachable moment. Because it turns out apology skills matter whether you're saving the world or just trying to survive a bad day. And before we dive in, help us reach more listeners by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Today we're talking Doctor Strange, a movie where one man's ego does almost as much damage as any villain. And because ego can play a major role in willingness to apologize or apologize well, and ego often needs to be set aside in order to give a real apology.
I think that's a good take. First off, with this movie, I appreciate the mind-bending storytelling. But my initial thought about this movie is that while Doctor Strange does apologize a couple times, ultimately it isn't enough. He says the words, but he never fully sits in the impact of what he's done. Maybe that's his ego at play.
The brakes on that a little bit. I don't think that's totally a fair assessment. I think, what makes his arc work is he's not perfect at it. He's trying to work it out, work in progress. And his apologies combined with how he changes through the movies show how real growth can happen.
I don't know. I mean, yes, on the growth, but I think saying I'm sorry without fully owning the harm can feel hollow, especially on the receiving end.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Yeah, but I'm more thinking that, growth doesn't always have to show up fully formed, in its final, stage or whatever. Sometimes apology is messy and the change is what gives it meaning.
So I guess we're asking, are Strange's apologies actually meaningful, or are they the beginning of something bigger?
And either way, I think we're looking at all the moments where he could have said more and what happens when he doesn't.
But first, we're diving into our apology audit. Who owns their impact, who avoids it, and who makes things worse. After that, we'll discuss the missed apologies that could have changed everything and wrap up with the damage diary, where we add up all the emotional and financial costs in Doctor Strange.
So let's get into it. Stephen Strange, his ego, and whether saying I'm sorry is ever really enough.
And if we miss something or get it wrong, we are super sorry.
All right, listeners, where are you landing on this one? Are you aligned with me that messy apologies plus real change actually count more?
Or are you with me that Strange's apologies don't go far enough? Either way, Doctor Strange kicks off with a guy who's brilliant, respected, and completely ruled by his ego.
When the movie opens, Stephen Strange is a world-class surgeon who only takes cases that make him look good, pushes people away, and never really has to answer for how he treats them. That is, until the car accident, where he loses the use of his hands and suddenly all that control he built into his identity is gone. And that sends him spiraling, burning through money, relationships, and any goodwill people had toward him, especially his colleague and friend, Christine.
From there, he ends up in Nepal at Kamar-Taj, which is the home and training grounds for the master of the mystic arts. Here, instead of fixing his hands, he's forced to rethink everything, how the world works, who he is, and what actually matters. And this is where it gets interesting for us, because Strange starts to apologize.
Yeah, but the real question is, are those apologies meaningful on their own, or do they only matter if they're backed up by real accountability?
It's time for our apology audit, where we track who says sorry, who almost gets there, and who makes things worse. We've pulled our top picks for the best and worst apologies in Doctor Strange, and how they stack up against the question, is saying I'm sorry ever really enough?
Since Doctor Strange is a little light on the explicit apologies, we've decided to just focus on one very best and one very worst apology.
So I'll start us off with our super sorry, our best apology in the movie Doctor Strange, which I think, well, honestly, there's not a whole lot of options here. But I think the best apology comes from Doctor Strange to Dr. Christine Palmer, and this is more towards the latter half of the film. The context going into this scene is, this is after Strange has been at Kamar-Taj and doing all of his training. He appears mid-surgery after disappearing from her life. And this is like the first time he acknowledges how badly he treated her before his accident. And what he says, his apology is, Christine, I am so sorry for all of it. You were right. I was a complete asshole. I treated you so horribly and you deserved so much more. So, like I said, this is the first time he actually acknowledges how he treated her. In terms of like his ego, it's like the clearest moment where he like does a shift that we can see. And that he's like sort of moving from this very self-centered kind of genius into someone who's somewhat capable of accountability. So it shows a bit of his growth, which isn't always just about power. It's a little bit about empathy too, at least in this moment. So to me, that was the best apology in the movie.
Yeah, I would agree. That's the best apology in the movie. It's his beginning of like just getting a little cracking the door open a little bit, understanding what accountability means. And he's been writing emails to Christine and just trying to, get her to respond, and she obviously doesn't want to really deal with him with all the bad things he's done to her and really horrible things he said to her when she was trying to help him after his accident and recovery and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little crack in the door open, like I said, what he's, where he needs to go. So yes, I think that's a good first step for him.
Yeah. And he really did treat her and many other people horribly, just lashing out, not accepting their help or not even accepting the truths they were trying to tell him. So I guess good to see that he has this moment where he at least starts to take ownership in what is maybe with a very safe person.
Well, it's the first of many that probably needs apologies.
Yes.
So top of mind, he still has the watch she gave to him and all this stuff. So he obviously has some...
He cares for her.
He cares for her. So it's kind of a showing of that he's kind of, wants to try to do better.
Yeah, exactly.
And for me, I'm going to jump into the sorry, not sorry.
The worst apology.
The worst apology in there. This one I think is another pretty obvious one. And it's, again, from Stephen Strange to Christine. And this is after his car accident, after all the surgeries, all the failed rehabs and all his, just trying to get his life back to the way it was. And he just kind of keeps hitting roadblock after roadblock and he's getting frustrated and he ends up just kind of like taking it out on Christine when she's there, like sacrificing a lot. They weren't even in a couple or anything when the movie starts. They kind of dated a little bit, but she doesn't really owe him anything.
I think she's even bringing him groceries.
Yeah.
In that scene.
So she's really going out on a limb trying to help him out. And he's just, feeling sorry for himself and wants to just lash out at her. And he basically refuses to apologize when she clearly asked for it. They're in his fancy apartment, and then she's basically trying to redirect all his energies because he's like just so hyper-focused on his recovery. And he's like, there's other things in life that can give you meaning besides just being a surgeon. And he's like, what, like you? Which is, yeah, I mean, that is there, but he's obviously not interested in a relationship at this point. And then she says, this is the part where you apologize. He's like, nah, I think this is the part when you leave. Ouch. Pretty rough there. She just like gives him this like a very easy, soft pitching the ball for him to hit a home run. And he's just not interested. He just wants to double down, triple down, quadruple down on being an asshole and says, get out of here.
Yeah, it almost makes me wonder because she coaches him on this and she's basically like, now is the time for you to say you're sorry. It's not an ultimatum, but it's almost like I wonder if she's thinking, if he doesn't apologize, I'm out of here. And he then just chooses it for her.
Oh, yeah.
And says, leave, which is just so cruel. And I get that he feels like a lot of self-hatred in that moment, but she didn't deserve that.
Oh, for sure. Like she has no, personal relationship with him at this point, and she's going above and beyond the duties of friendship, and he's just not interested.
And it's a good reminder, I think, to all of us when we get really focused on our own stuff, that there's still other people existing in our world who are impacted by the things we do. So it's just like a little mental note to say that's a good thing to remember, We don't exist solely in the world on our own.
And also just having some empathy for others and what they're sacrificing for you.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, we did say this episode is a little light on the apologies. So because of that, there's actually a lot more opportunities for apologies that could have been. So that's where we're going to go next. Our super sorry verse, where we imagine the apologies that never happened and how an apology could have changed everything. All right, we've talked about the apologies we did get in Doctor Strange, and now it's time for the ones we didn't. Welcome to Apologies That Could Have Been, aka the Super Sorry Verse.
This is where we step in, rewrite the moment, and give them the apology they could have said, because this story isn't missing apologies entirely, but it is full of moments where they don't go far enough.
Which is why this segment is less about fixing the plot and more about finishing the conversation. Like, what would it sound like if Strange actually owned his impact? Or if the people around him got the kind of accountability that they deserved?
We're keeping it simple, honest, no mystic jargon, just better communication. So let's step into the super sorry verse and try it a different way. I'll go first. My apology that could have been is starting at the beginning of the movie. There's a whole scene where there's a patient that has a bullet in their head. And to me, there's kind of like two sides of the same coin going on here with the Doctor Strange character and also his colleague, Dr. West, who is the doctor who has decided that the patient with the bullet in their head is now passed away. And it's called the time of death. And he's about to harvest their organs. Super sorry. You're not dead, but I'm already kind of moving things on. Dr. West should apologize to his patient, who's actually still alive and is still able to recover, as we see. And the other side of the coin is Dr. Stephen Strange himself, who's basically very cavalier in his non-use of taking the time to have a scanned image of the brain. He's just going to, free-handed. He's just going to go in there without any help, which Christine's kind of asking him for. And he's doing what Dr. West calls showboating. So he's also risking this patient's life for really, putting this patient on the line for not really a good reason also. So the apology I'd like to see is from Doctor Strange and Dr. West to the patient that has the bullet in their head.
Oh, that's interesting. I also have a moment here where I think Doctor Strange could have apologized to Dr. West because he basically mocks him and undermines him in front of the rest of their colleagues. And I think even Christine kind of says, like, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But that adds to his being so cavalier in this moment that he just believes he is so much better than Dr. West. And even though Dr. West was wrong, Strange was kind of unnecessarily cruel in this moment. He didn't have to respond that way or showboat like he did. Like, luckily he was successful and he was able to retrieve the bullet from the patient's brain. But it's concerning. And also, of course, it establishes Dr. Strange's very toxic arrogance
yeah.
in the opening scene.
Early on, yeah. You kind of know who this character is, by his arrogance.
Yeah. And there's like no baseline decency that we even see with this character, which is a little different than some other Marvel characters. I almost feel like this is more in the vein of like Iron Man versus like Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to stay on this path of the medical care. And I think that Doctor Strange, he owes an apology to so many people, but Doctor Strange could apologize to the character Jonathan Pangborn, who he denied care to when he basically couldn't walk anymore. Mm-hmm. And, Doctor Strange is trying to find a solution for his hands. And he hears from the physical therapist, who he also owes an apology to. He was so cruel to that physical therapist.
Yeah.
But he hears from that physical therapist that he had only ever seen one patient be able to improve and go on with his life. And so that's Jonathan Pangborn. So he comes across him or finds him at the basketball courts. And we learn that either Dr. Strange or his assistant refused treatment to Jonathan Pangborn, essentially based on his odds of being successful with any treatment. So I think in this moment, it's very clear that if Strange had acted differently and at least tried to assist Jonathan Pangborn, maybe his life would look a little bit different if he wasn't so focused on success and instead he was focused on at least trying to help a patient's care. Though I suppose ultimately Jonathan still tells him about the mystic arts and what he did and sends Strange on his own journey. But it makes me wonder what would it have been like if Dr. Strange had actually tried to treat Jonathan.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you bring that up because, going back to the beginning of the movie, it's also kind of set up during his conversation in his car, Lamborghini riding down the side of the road when he goes off the cliff. He's talking to someone on the phone. The person's bringing up potential patients and he says, oh, you're going to wreck my perfect record with that one. I'm not going to do that one. So it's definitely mentioned a few times that he's only taking patients that he thinks can be successful because he has a perfect record that he doesn't want to mess up. So it's a lot of weird kind of commentary about the medical field and patient-doctor relationships in there. But
I do want to say too, though, I think it's interesting how Strange totally blames his assistant and doesn't even take accountability in that moment to Jonathan, who said you refused my care.
And I'll go probably one step further than Dr. Strange refusing care to Jonathan Pangborn character. And that's the post-credit scene with Mordo, who decides there's too many sorcerers in the universe and decides to take his powers away from him, which re-cripples Jonathan back to his original self. There's too many sorcerers going around, tying into the dark dimension, using powers for their own goods, and decides to take that back from Jonathan. So I think even maybe worse than refusing care is taking a patient that has been quote unquote fixed and returning them to their prior state.
Yeah, that's devastating and horrible. That's just kind of a very asshole thing to do. Well, I'm going to shift away from medical care and all of that for a moment. And I think there's an opportunity for the Ancient One to apologize to Dr. Strange when she basically was trying to get him to tap into his magical ability. And she takes him to Mount Everest, essentially to teach him a lesson. And she leaves him there. So he's stranded on Mount Everest, trying to force him to use magic, which he ultimately does. But in my opinion, it was a bit extreme. And I think she could have at least acknowledged hey, I may have pushed you a little too far. It also, I think, raises some ethical questions into her teaching methods. And it almost mirrors Dr. Strange, his own willingness to push limits on others. So just kind of an intriguing scene. I don't think the Ancient One would ever apologize, honestly. So this is sort of just wishful thinking.
Yeah, I would totally agree with the Ancient One needed to apologize to Dr. Strange. And she's basically shown him the multiverse kind of as a way of, putting him in his place. And she's kind of has a very kind of amateur, very new student here. And she's really kind of given him the hard level tests, pretty early on. And it's kind of pushed him a little harder than maybe he needs to be.
I mean, I suppose she sees potential. So that is why. But they also compare him a bit to Caecilius, which I think is problematic, right? Though I suppose you could argue that Caecilius is a bit of a better character than you initially think he is. You think he's all bad, whereas he just has, I guess, a different perspective on the dark dimension and how those powers are being used.
Going back to Caecilius, him and his dark dimension zealots, so his little gang of followers, I think need an apology from Dormammu, who very quickly gives up on the fight for them when Doctor Strange does a little time loop, trick on them. And it's only a couple minutes screen time. So I'm sure in reality, his probably was going more than hopefully 2 minutes and he just kind of throws in the towel. But this is an interdimensional being that has a longer lifespan than the humans and whatnot. So I think he could have been a little more patient and might have been able to outlast Doctor Strange. And I feel like this is a chance for Dormammu to really turn the screws on Doctor Strange for trying to oh, you're going to mess with me? Well, I'll wait you for 1 billion years and see how many time loops you're going to do, dude. So he just kind of throws in the towel a little too quick for Caecilius and his zealots who all get sucked up to the dark dimension at the end of the movie.
I think this moment, Doctor Strange's ego really works well for him because he just believes that he has found this loophole, which he has. And I swear he just annoyed him as much as possible. And then Dormammu was I don't want to deal with this anymore. So that's what I think.
Yeah, Doctor Strange superpower just being a jerk, and is the way he's annoying is the way he does it too is a little bit annoying. This is the way he's speaking to him, Strange to Dormammu, and it's just rubs the wrong way. He's I don't want to deal with this dude. So he just throws in the towel and wraps up the movie.
Yeah. Well, like we said, lots of opportunities for apologies here in Doctor Strange, and I think that wraps up our time here in the Super Sorry verse. Where saying I'm sorry is just the start, not the finish line. Up next, Damage Diary, where we tally the damage and who's left dealing with it. Welcome to Damage Diary, the part of the show where we track what gets destroyed, who's left dealing with it, and who never really answers for the fallout.
And what's interesting to me about Doctor Strange is that, at least on the surface level, it looks like there's less damage.
Right. That's because most of the damage happens in the mirror dimension, where the real world isn't actually impacted.
Which is probably great for property damage, but maybe not so great for learning accountability.
Well, let's start at the beginning, which is the car crash, ground zero, I guess, for everything. In my opinion, this accident is entirely preventable. Strange is speeding, he's distracted, he's reviewing patient files while driving, and it all ends with a life-altering injury.
Probably lots of damage there to Doctor Strange, but it's also damage to his his Lamborghini that he's driving. It's probably $250,000 there, and we got the road, the guardrails, emergency response teams, and probably Strange's medical costs. And we're looking probably easily at $2 to $5 million in personal medical damage, and all from probably a completely preventable ego-driven crash.
Yeah, I have to say I would have paused at these numbers, but it's such a key component of the story that he spent all his riches on his medical treatment. So, yeah. Which is interesting because we've clearly got a pattern with Doctor Strange. It's harm caused by ego and control, and there's no real accountability beyond dealing with the consequences itself, like his hands.
Yeah, and moving on to bigger conflicts, we got, New York, London, the sanctums, buildings falling on themselves, streets twisting, reality breaking. But again, a lot of that just gets contained or hidden from the real world public out there because it's the mirror dimension. And since we're tracking it, as we do, it looks like millions of damage. But in reality, probably for New York, it's a low six figures kind of max there. But in London, it's probably a little more damage. It gets a little more real there. And it's more likely in the multi-million-dollar in losses, especially when you factor in all those priceless magical artifacts that are getting wrecked.
But the biggest visible impact comes at the end of the movie in Hong Kong. And by the time Strange gets there, the city is already wrecked, the sanctum is destroyed, and people, including Wong, are dead. If you're just looking at the structural damage, that could be 500,000 to 1.5 million before Strange steps in.
Yeah, then he reverses time and he steps up and stops Dormammu, putting himself in that endless time loop.
Yeah, I feel like Strange here doesn't resolve the conflict exactly. He does a really good job of annoying him, I think.
Yeah.
Just out commits to it.
Yeah, I could see that, yeah. But, as we're reversing time here, all the buildings are coming back. The sanctum is, restored. The damage is undone, and he achieves his goal.
He does, but it raises a big question we've never considered before. If you erase the damage, do you still have to answer for it?
I think reversing it is real action. All the damage is reversed and restored.
But it's not the same thing as being present and realizing the impact of the harm along the way, especially with the people closest to him. Which brings me, I guess, to what Damage Diary is all about. It's not just about the buildings or the cities, it's about the people that are impacted along the way. So I guess with that in mind, let's zoom in a bit to the human cost, our innocent bystanders, and the people left dealing with everything Strange doesn't fully own, which is everything.
All right, I'll start us off with my first innocent bystander. And we're kind of allude to this a little bit earlier on in the podcast when we talk about Stephen Strange and he's driving his fancy Lamborghini down the road and he, spins it off and crashes through the guardrail and goes off the side down into the canyon below. But we don't really talk about the innocent bystander in that situation, which is the other car that he actually bumps into. So what drives him off the side of the road is he's distracted looking at the image of a patient that he might take or might not take, but at the same time going around another car and he taps into the rear bumper of it, which kind of spins him out. We don't really see what happens to this other car. Do they also go off the side of the hill or do they crash? I mean, he's going pretty fast. There'd definitely be a pretty severe impact going on. And what's, really the outcome of them is not in this movie at all.
Yeah, you're right. We don't see any mention or hear any mention of them or what happened to them or if they needed their own medical treatment and all that. So it's a little short-sighted, honestly, on the filmmakers, just because I think it would have been another example of his ego. But I suppose in that moment, they were still trying to make him like slightly likable. So maybe that's why they didn't do that. In terms of other innocent bystanders, I was really struck by the innocent bystanders who were part of the scene when the Ancient One is kind of like blasted out of the building and crashes onto the street, falling to their death. Like there are people standing around as she falls, and that has to be pretty traumatic. And who knows what sort of like psychological trauma there are for those witnesses. And also it leaves this question of like, maybe the magic isn't as contained as we sort of have been promised. I know they're not in the mirror dimension at this moment, but it really brings the reality to the surface of not only is the Ancient One fallen to their death, until we see this moment, we're not even sure if the Ancient One can die. So a lot of going on here. And I feel for those people.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, traumatic event with the Ancient Ones falling out of the sky. They fall through a glass awning, in the building, crashes through, hits the ground. There's obviously lots of people around going about their normal day and, it's obviously being affected.
Yeah.
And as a, result of the Ancient One dying, now the Earth has no Sorcerer Supreme to defend it. So Dr. Strange has to, fill that void or whatnot. And, it also kind of makes me think of, it's talked about a lot in the movie about this impending bill coming due at some point. We don't really see that bill ever coming to the table or being paid or whatever. So there's a lot of open questions with these innocent bystanders.
Yeah. Do you think that comment was about the innocent bystanders though? Or do you think it was more about anyone with sorcery powers?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely more lines of, the multiverse and the use of magic and kind of breaking the time-space continuum and all that. But I just meant, even for the innocent bystanders, there's a bill of the trauma being done to them that's never paid.
Yeah. What it does make me think of is, in Hong Kong, towards the end, when we have the dark dimension attack and Dormammu is like consuming the city. And by the time, Strange shows up, there's tons of destruction. People have been killed. The whole city essentially has been overtaken. But then, of course, it's all reversed by Doctor Strange using the Eye of Agamotto to do that. So we see the survivors are resurrected, and things are kind of put back in place to what they were prior to that attack. But I have to wonder, does the mind remember or does the body remember dying for all these innocent bystanders? What is the psychological residue that is left behind by reversing time? Sure, you undo the damage, but do you undo the psychological impact? There has to be remnants left behind. Yeah. So to me, it just sort of raises this huge moral question about tampering with time and how that impacts death and reality. So big question mark for me.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's even a question mark, because I think the Wong character kind of answers that question at the end of the movie, where they say we don't tamper with the natural laws, we defend it. So it's basically implying that what Stephen Strange is doing is tampering with the natural laws and causing problems. And that's what the bill coming due is, because he's messing with the natural laws and things are happening. And
yeah, I guess that's his ego coming into play, and maybe kind of some of the work he did as a surgeon a bit too, where he would really just be able to do things that it seemed like no one else could do. So it's in line, I suppose, with his character. But it also makes me think of separately, there's the magical books that Doctor Strange is looking at in the library. And he, when he first does the manipulation of time, he's of course interrupted, and Wong is talks about how the warnings are in the books, but they come after the spells. And it's just that seems short-sighted for whoever it is that is writing the spells or writing these books, that they should be warning at the beginning of the spells, not at the end. Just something to think about.
I think the audience of these books are people that have some time up there in the mountains, and they're going to read the whole book. They're not just skimming through it, I guess is what the thought was. So they want to show what's possible, explain what it is before you can say not to do it. Yeah.
But that's not what Doctor Strange did. He acted before he read the whole thing. It's do you remember in grade school, they would do this kind of test where they would give you a list and it says do all these things, and you're jumping up out of your chair, you're doing jumping jacks or things like that. But if you actually read read the directions all the way through, which is the very first thing. It says, read the directions all the way through. It says, just sit in your chair. You don't have to do any of this. You ever do this?
It sounds familiar, but yeah.
That's what this moment reminds me of, is like, follow the directions, read everything through before you take action. So...
And just because you can do something, I think Wong is saying, doesn't mean you should do it. So there's consequences of jumping before you look, yeah.
Well, I think that's it for Damage Diary. Because even when the damage looks like it's undone, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Buildings get rebuilt, cities get reset. Time, in this case, literally reverses. But the experience, the fear, the loss, the impact on people, that doesn't just disappear because the timeline got cleaned up.
Strange does step up. He takes action, he sacrifices, but the question we keep circling is, does fixing the outcome mean you fully own the impact?
Which brings us to the bigger question behind all of it. What is this movie actually saying about change, accountability, and whether I'm sorry is ever really enough? Up next in our biggest takeaway. Doctor Strange isn't really about magic or bending reality. It's about what happens when someone starts to change, but hasn't fully learned how to take responsibility for who they've been.
And instead of refusing to apologize, Doctor Strange kind of flips the problem. He does say, I'm sorry. He does step up. The question is whether that's actually enough, or if his ego is still shaping how far he's willing to go.
Which brings us to our biggest takeaway. Doctor Strange shows us that saying I'm sorry matters, but it's not the whole story. If you don't fully understand the impact you've had on someone, the apology doesn't always land, especially when your ego is still protecting how you see yourself in the situation.
But at the same time, growth counts because Doctor Strange changes. He sacrifices. He puts himself on the line to fix what's broken, even if he doesn't always have the perfect words or the humility to fully impact the damage.
So maybe it's not either or. Maybe it's both. The words and the follow-through. Because you can say I'm sorry, or you can prove it. But ideally, you do both. And you don't let your ego decide where that effort stops.
And that's the tension this movie leaves us with. Strange saves the world, but some of the more personal damage, that part's still a little unresolved. Maybe because that's the part of his ego that he hasn't fully cut up on yet.
And that's it for Doctor Strange. Time reversed, and we pondered a big question about whether fixing the outcome means you've fixed the impact.
For me, what's wild is it's not that the apologies aren't there, it's that they don't always go far enough. So we'll leave you with this. Have you ever said, I'm sorry, but stop short of really owning the impact?
And what would it look like to take that one step further? Not just taking the first step to fix the problem, but actually naming what it meant for someone else and letting go of the part that wants to be right.
If you're enjoying the show, share it with someone who loves Marvel or just loves a good conversation about getting things right even after you've gotten them wrong.
And don't forget to stick around for one last thing after the credits. Next up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we take on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where found family gets messy, emotions run high, and the hardest conversations are the ones no one knows how to have. Until then, I'm Amber.
I'm Todd.
And we are
Super Sorry.
Super Sorry is written and hosted by Todd and Amber. Produced by A Super Sorry LLC. Music by Jam Studio. Special thanks to MCU Wiki and Wikipedia for serving as sources for Damage Diary. Your support helps us keep asking the hard questions and saying the hard apologies. Thanks for tuning in and sharing with friends. And if you're listening from Hong Kong, Nepal, or the Mirror Dimension, we are super sorry.
One last thing. Did you catch the book title that Stan Lee is reading when he's on the bus? The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. It's a little meta there where Stan Lee, who is the creator of this crazy altered nature and universe of Doctor Strange, is reading a book about the psychedelic nature of altered states and limited perceptions us humans have in the true nature of reality.
Super Sorry is not affiliated with Marvel Entertainment, Marvel Studios, the Walt Disney Company, or Disney+. As of this recording, all Marvel characters mentioned in this podcast are the property of the Walt Disney Company.